Yeah. So I'm secretly an evolutionary psychologist, so don't tell anybody. Let's see. So this Dark Triad thing, it's something that I've been studying for something like 20 years. And before I start, I want to just welcome my two special guests in the back, my brother Leo and Jess, who are here in Czech Republic celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary with us. And it was his suggestion that he was coming here that made me put all this together so I could be here to spend some time with him, having not seen him in something like 20 years. But back to me, of course, is this thing called the Dark Triad. And there's a lot of ways I could slice this for you. And I want to give you a kind of overview of what the field has been in kind of a science of science kind of way, as well as how my thoughts have changed over the course of these 20 years from really a myopic view, in my view, of the Dark Triad in terms of having studied things like romantic relationships and sexual relationships and only being able to see the Dark Triad through that lens. And as I've maybe matured intellectually and psychologically, I started thinking, yeah, maybe I was wrong about this. Maybe it's not that thing. Maybe it's some other thing that might actually be more interesting, more compelling. So this is just motives and values are just something to hold it together. But if you don't know what the Dark Triad are, and I suspect most of you do, it's composed of 3 socially undesirable traits, but measured in subclinical populations. So especially in the early years of this research, people were really struggling with, they couldn't take the word psychopathy out of clinical or criminal contexts. So we study psychopathy among your professors, among your friends, among just quote unquote normal people. And so we just do large samples of people to get at things like how antisocial, how impulsive, how limited is your empathy. Narcissism being slightly more well known nowadays. It's almost a term that's being weaponized by people where someone does something that you don't like someone does something to you that you don't like, therefore they're a narcissist, for example. And so we use this term now in colloquial ways. It doesn't really exactly resemble what we mean in terms of our research, but it's a popular term nevertheless. And you, of course, know about it. It's things like grandiosity, a need for admiration, and being braggadocious. And I use this word braggadocious because someone really hurt my narcissistic ego when they told me that I didn't know English well for putting this in a paper. I was like, no, that's the right word. And I screenshot the definition from Oxford to win the argument with the journal. But they didn't like this word, but I like it. And it's just like it sounds. Someone who brags a lot. That's all. Braggadocious. So me. And the last one, the one that people don't maybe know as much, it comes from the business literature more than it comes from, say, personality psychology. Although the people who invented the standard measure of this were personality psychologists, Christian Geiss in 1970, as you see here. People were alive back then, I promise. These are people who are manipulative. They are pragmatic. They see that the ends justify the means kind of orientation, and they're a bit cynical about other people. So this has been an image that people have used, and people try to say there should be a tetrad, like sadism should be added, and we'll get to that later about why I don't think we need to add sadism to the mix. Of course, Martina already introduced my book. This book is meant to be a resource for if you want to study any of these traits, to just get a crash course of the measure and what that measure has helped us learn about reality. It's not worth just creating measures just to create measures. It's like this weird, fun psychometric game that a lot of researchers do. A measure needs to do something. It needs to help us a little bit. And of course, there's many measures for all of these things. And that's what we tried to cover, at least some of them in this book. We tried to make a second edition, but what's the word? The motivation, the fire behind making another book is dying out as we have ChatGPT and all these other resources that are available to us now. So without question, the Dark Triad are one of the most popular topics. And so one of the reasons I am as well cited as I am is because I kind of got on this wagon at the very beginning, before it became something interesting. And so I was able to fill the space, to fill the void, and get lots and lots of publications, and then lots and lots of people have to cite me. So the first paper on the Dark Triad was published in 2020. here is by Paul Outson Williams. And if I'm honest with you, it was trivial. It was a brief report. It was just, look, the Dark Triad are correlated with the Big Five, right? Antagonism, the disagreeable aspect of the Big Five in particular. And it could have gone nowhere. It was just this like, hey, look, Machiavellianism and psychopathy and narcissism, they're correlated, and they're correlated with similar things. Okay, straight, traditional personality psychology. Then I come along in 2008, and I go to Japan, and I present my first study on this, looking at the Dark Triad traits in relation to people's mating psychology, interest in casual sex, for example. And the media just loved this because I used James Bond as my kind of model to explain this, right? That James Bond is basically a psychopath. He's just a psychopath we like because he's killing people on our behalf, right? And the media loved this. So this was back when Daniel Craig was James Bond, of course, my preferred James Bond. Sorry, I don't mean to insult anyone who likes Sean Connery. And so it just, as you see, it started to pick up some momentum now, okay? Now it picks up more momentum in 2010 when I published my scale called the Dirty Dozen. I like cute names for these things. So why is it the Dirty Dozen? Well, because it's 4 items to measure 3 traits. It's 12 items to measure something dirty. And it's also dirty in that it's really quick and really brief, right? So if you have no money and you have no time, use this measure. Now, if you have money and you have time, unlike me, I have neither of those things, then use longer measures, which is one that came up in 2014. This is considered, this is by Dan Jones and Del Paulhaus, this is considered the, let's call it the best of both worlds for those of you who like Star Trek, right? It's brief enough that it doesn't take, it's not 90 questions long, 100 questions long, but each of the dimensions is broad enough that it captures more than just 4 items could possibly capture, right? So as you see here, now we're escalating, we're kind of going up in this kind of multiplicative way, yeah? So, oh, sorry, one other thing came along I forgot about this. In 2012, I didn't mention this. So I started integrating the Dark Triad traits into what's called a life history framework, something I'll go over in a little bit. This seemed to be quite effective in presenting an alternative way of seeing these traits that allowed a lot of evolutionary psychologists to kind of jump on the bandwagon. It was like, oh, wait, we could study something like the Dark Triad, claim that it's an adaptation, and we can show evidence for why we think it might be an adaptation from an evolutionary perspective. So I want to now go to more general publishing trends. And so remember, James Bond was one that I used. This has helped me a lot. But I was constantly getting interviews, and people were saying, "What about a female version? Give me a female kind of archetype. Who can I?" And it took me a long time, but I think Jennifer Lawrence, when she plays this spy in Red Sparrow, I think that's probably a good example. Now, once you see this, though, you can't help but see it in everything you watch, right? So if anyone like the cartoon Futurama. I mean, Bender is a raging high Dark Triad person. Everywhere you will see it constantly in the faces of your friends. You will see it on television. You'll be like, oh yeah, that's a bit psychopathic. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so I want to do a little poking here. I won't belabor this here because I don't want to waste a lot of time, but I can send you this link if someone wants to send me. So what we did is we created what I'm going to show you next. Is an interactive tool that you can click on to say, I'm interested in this one topic, this one aspect of the web in the Dark Triad, and it'll tell you all the other papers that are all the other topics that are connected to it. So the idea when we did these analyses I'm going to show you in a second, was to create a kind of resource for authors. Now, as many people know here, oftentimes students vanish, and so the paper just died. And so we haven't published this, so thankfully I can just present it to you like this. So what you have here are the web, the network of all the different kind of basic topics. And this brought us to about 2023, I think, is when we finished this analysis. And then the student just vanished. So we didn't do anything with this. I think I might put this in a book chapter I have to write soon. Although someone encouraged me last night to just use ChatGPT. And I died inside a little bit. I was like, no, I must write the chapter myself. Anyways. So you'll see I'm going to go through these different areas, but this is essentially the web of interconnected keywords of topics that are related to the Dark Triad, and I'll go through them now for you in the sections by color. Now, the first one is the central unit, right? This central unit says, basically, where does all this research converge on? And it converges on the heart of the Dark Triad, if you will, which is about aggressiveness, limited empathy, antisociality, antagonism, that kind of core. So in the center is this kind of heart of darkness, if you will, okay? Up here on the top is a topic that I've gotten into fairly often, but not as much as other people have, of course. But this is we can call it the social psychology. But you should really just call it the Facebook, right? The cyberbullying, the bullying, the victimization, kind of classic social psychology topics. I don't spend a lot of time over here. I spend more of my time over here. So this is the area that I carved out in the Dark Triad. And as you can see, it's heavily laden with things like mating strategies, sociosexuality, sexual behavior, because that's where it's this joke about when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So the only tool I had in my brain was a hammer at the time. And so the Dark Triad, yeah, they're adaptations for sexuality and promiscuity. I don't think that anymore. But when I was younger and I was more of an idiot than I am now, I delved into this quite a bit. So this is the part that we carved out unique. The rest of this more or less already existed to a fair degree. Indeed, this part is pretty standard personality psychology. Right? We're talking about moral disengagement, intelligence, decision-making, honesty and humility from the big six, right? From the hexaco model. And what I want to highlight for anybody who are new in this game and new in research is not this section, but this section here. This is the fastest growing section of research on the Dark Triad. This is the organizational psychology side, right? So there's money to be made to hire, fire, detect, deter, all that type of thing for people high on the Dark Triad. So you see job performance, abusive supervision, leadership, and I'll talk a little bit about this, but this is the fastest growing component. This component is stable. People's interest in sex, just constant. We're always interested in sex, basically. Psychologists, at least. I don't know about you guys. But this is the area. So if you want to carve out something new, this is worth doing. So I have people in Austria, for example, working on this area already, but there's so much to do here, so much utility in this. Okay? So I'm going to give you an overview of what we know about the traits, starting with, of course, mating, but also things like prejudice, what I call niche specialization, their limited empathy effects, and organizational psychology. So they're related to casual sex. They're likely to engage in prejudicial behavior, prejudicial attitudes. In particular, narcissists seem to be prejudiced towards outgroup members who they feel are in competition with them. And Machiavellians seem to be prejudiced towards outgroup members who seem like a fear of usurpers, a fear of outsiders, a different kind of prejudice. Okay, but sometimes instead of looking forward from what a trait is, like looking at what a trait predicts in the world, we should say, okay, well, what predicts that trait? What underlies that trait? Because to me, personality traits aren't really in our brains anyways. They're behavioral syndromes that exist just here, just at your nose, where they are explained by a confluence of motives and values and morals in your brain already. And then this behavioral syndrome predicts all those other things you do, whether it be using Tinder or kicking your dog or wearing nice suits or whatever it is that you do in the world is predicted by this thing here, right? So what we want to do is let's take a step back, look inside people's heads, not in their brains, because we're not neuropsychologists. We want to look what characterizes these people at their core, like what makes these people tick? Why do they engage in these behaviors, these attitudes? And so under these behavioral syndromes must be things kind of pushing them. I mean, we live in a deterministic mindset. Something must determine the pattern of behavior that we observe that we call psychopathy. Right? So psychopathy is a pattern of behavior. It's a behavioral syndrome. So let's talk about values to start. Values are a truism in the sense that it's a very popular topic. And of course, no shit, everybody values different things. So why do some people value some things more than others? So of course, I'm a quantitative researcher, not a qualitative researcher. These are kids saying poo-poo to qualitative research. So we collect lots of data. Okay. So in this these studies, we have Swedes, we have Americans. These are the ones I'm going to present you with, Brazilians. And we used the traditional measures of the Dark Triad, the MPI, which is the gold standard, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, 40 items. This one's 32, I think. This one's 20. And then Schwartz's social values. This is probably the most famous value taxonomy that we have. Over here, we used the short dark tetrad. This is where we include sadism as well in the mix. And what a person in Brazil whose name I cannot say, unfortunately, his basic values survey. And so I'll present you that information here. So lots of noise, but let's show you what matters. Oh, sorry. The stuff in the parentheses, ignore, because this is a mistake that I used to make. So let's not make this mistake anymore. These are multiple regression coefficients. And the reason it's a mistake, for those of you interested in this, is you can't really interpret the beta weight because I have no idea what's left over in Machiavellianism when you remove narcissism and psychopathy. Like I don't understand what that is. I can't make sense of it. So it doesn't really make much sense to focus on it. And so you'll see people in papers say, oh, well, something uniquely predicted something. The residual of Machiavellianism uniquely predicted something, but I have no idea what that is in terms of concept or theory or anything like that. So let's focus on the stuff on the outside. So this is terrible, of course, hard to read, but why don't you just look at this instead? So what we have here is negative correlations with things like security, tradition. These are people who clearly, all of them, to more or less extent, don't value these things here, right, to this side. So self-direction, universalism, benevolence, conformity, tradition, security. But they do care about these things, right? Stimulation, hedonism, achievement, power, okay? Like Darth Sidious or something, yeah? So, and of course, these are the stronger ones over here, right? They want to be number one and they want to be dominant. This is starting to get me thinking about maybe it's not about the sex stuff. Maybe what's really making these people tick is this stuff over here. This is with my Swedish colleague, for example. Now, if you want to see this another way, because we all like pictures, because pictures are better than words, you see that the crux of the action is here, achievement and power. We're accounting for 18% of the variance, and in both cases with the Dark Triad. So not an amazing correlation, of course, but that's the game we're in, right? We rarely have correlations above 0.2. So if we can get 0.4, we're like, yes. Okay? So they're really in this self-enhancement, at least in terms of the circumplex model of personality. They're really operating in this space over here. Okay? So let's talk about these basic human values instead. Well, we find similar we find similar things going on. Now, the terms are not exactly the same, but they're very much concerned with promotion, like I want to rise myself up, and being excited. You see the correlations here, right, for example. So narcissistic people are probably more motivated by promotion, right? They want to achieve, they want to be looked up to, they want to be admired. More so, of course, than people high on psychopathy, but correlated nevertheless. But they're not, for example, they're negatively correlated, I should say, psychopathy, with these, I mean, nice values, right? More progressive values, right? Normative, following the rules, right? How, you know, the quality of your social interactions, things that are bigger and better than us. Existence, they don't care about existence, right? These are people who are willing to sacrifice their existence to get what they want, right? The risk takers, for example. And with Machiavellianism, similarly over here, Machiavellians don't particularly care about the rules, right? The rules are kind of there for their benefit and they will dismiss them as they want, but they also don't care about people all that much, right? The quintessential piece of Machiavellianism is people are tools for my advancement, not, I don't like people for people's sake. I like people because of what they can do for me. Okay, so another big one. As always, I will highlight these things. But you see here again, achievement, power, and hedonism, maybe to a little bit less of extent with psychopathy. So psychopaths, maybe they're not motivated by pleasure. They might actually be ahedonic. They might almost lack pleasure systems. They're not doing things for pleasure. They're doing things for other motivations, potentially. So you see, again, achievement and power. So this is where I started to change my thinking. Actually, I think it might have been this paper, this data here. where I was like, I think I might have had this wrong. Because maybe what the Dark Triad are about is not the enjoyment of life, hedonism, like sexuality, for example, but maybe it's about this. Maybe what the Dark Triad are 3 ways of getting social status, social power. So my current thinking of this, and I'll give it to you in advance, is that the narcissist's route to what they want is popularity, the Machiavellians is influence, and the psychopaths is dominance. And they're just 3 different ways of achieving, of climbing social ladders, of climbing power structures, if you will. Okay? Same thing here. I won't belabor this. There's this kind of negative bias against the old, the establishment, right? Obedience, tradition. And of course, just simply being nice is just not really their thing. Okay? Okay, so I'll skip. I want to jump ahead from this. Okay, so values is cool, right? But motives are another way. So values and motives are quite similar in their conceptualization. People who value things and people who are motivated by a thing engage in behaviors that are consistent with those values or those motives typically. So when it comes to motives, we want to kind of bring some light to this darkness, right? We want to, again, be quantitative. So we got over 2,000 Americans and Australians, about, no surprise, 23 years old, and 942 Americans, okay? Online studies, no surprise, right? I mean, this is one of the benefits, one of the things I didn't mention in that chart for going up for the years is that when people started, and me in particular, who started doing Dark Triad research is when online data collection really took off. So MTurk was like a thing and it was on fire. And so we were just throwing money at MTurk, and there were no rules about how little you paid people at that time. So you could just have basically, not zero, but very little funding from your university, and you can get data after data after data. It just was great. So I totally took advantage of that situation. So we have the Dirty Dozen. We have this balance measure, so to speak, of psychological needs. We have something called goals. We have the SD3. This is where we don't have sadism. This is the CAST. This is a sadism measure because this was before the SD4 was created. We have a spitefulness scale. Spitefulness is a candidate for inclusion in the Dark Triad, but it just Dark Tetrad, Dark Septad, like how far are we going to go with this? So spitefulness is like it sounds. It's, do you cut off your nose to spite your face? It's a self-report measure of how spiteful you are. And lastly, one of my favorite frameworks, the fundamental social motives, unfortunately, 66 items. So again, a lot of numbers, but let's break it down, right? So Machiavellianism, I can't even see this. You see negative correlations with things like competence, autonomy, relatedness. These are people who are not really oriented towards other people, as we said, right? Especially in the case of relatedness. We find similar effects with psychopathy. And when we look across for competence, this seems to be binding all the Dark Triad together. And what's important here is if you look at the values inside the beta weights, right? These are the regression coefficients, that even when you remove the shared variance, there's still something about competence, still something about achievement, still something about being number one, being the dominant member of a social group that seems to really bind all the Dark Triad traits. And indeed, this was a lot of people's goal in researching the Dark Triad has been, well, what brings these together? Right? What holds these traits together? What is the shared psychology of these people? So my contention here for you to jump ahead is something like competence is what binds them together. Affiliation, they don't really, as I said, they're whatever, right? I mean, narcissists really want to be affiliated, right? So you see a nothing here, and this is the residual, and the residual of narcissism is basically just being mean. Right? It's being mean stuff. So no surprise there. Sorry. No, that's not what I was trying to say. Sorry. This is the nice narcissism, right? So when you remove the negative bits, which is what you do with the beta weight, you just get nice narcissism. And that's, that's like leadership, right? That type of stuff. It's not the antagonism and the entitlement and all those negative things. Nevertheless, people Machiavellian and psychopathic don't really care about affiliation. That's not something that motivates them. They're not trying to be friends with people. They're lone wolves, if you will. Yeah. More data on this. Power as another word to use the same thing. You find correlated, correlated, correlated. Particularly well correlated for narcissism here. Yeah. And so it's converging evidence on the same point. Now, a little bit of a side story for this particular study. About, what is this, 2026? Okay, a little more than a decade ago, the premier journal of Personality and Social Psychology, writes, Lynn Cooper, the editor, she writes this editorial about, oh yeah, we need to be more accepting of papers that where the data, the results don't exactly align, like where they're messy, because this is reality, right? All papers can't be clean, perfect. I mean, this is like what Daryl Bem totally capitalized on when he published his ESP study, right? He hid all the bad results, and he said, oh, look at all these amazing findings about you can be psychic, right? You can, if you don't know what this story is, basically he found in like 10 studies that men could predict that the next picture that they would see in a randomly generated series of photos would be a beautiful woman. But the prediction was like 55%. They had a 50-50 chance, and it was 55%, and this like blew up science. And so all the replication crisis that you hear about in your talks and classes, it's from this guy, Daryl Bem. Anyways, so we submitted this paper to this journal because we're like, this is exactly what we have. We have data with multiple measures. We have data that's not exactly clean. We have large sample sizes from many countries. Desk reject. Not even. Well, what about the article that you wrote, the editorial that said, this is what we want? Here, this is what you want. No, we don't want that. Well, anyways, so we published it somewhere else, of course. And to the end, sorry, again, another effect with limited intimacy, not motivated towards intimacy. Okay, so mixed results, as I said, because nothing is perfect. You have different measures, different samples, all sorts of error in the model. This is one of the troubles with studying people, is that even the sample could create kind of bias that creates correlations that turn out to not be real later. But we tried to converge using many, many measures. Okay, this is with the fundamental social motives now. This is one of my more favored approaches, and this is really what galvanized my thinking. So they don't really care about self-protection. Now, this is Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, sadism, and spitefulness. So now we have 5 traits, the pentad, if you will. Okay, they all don't care about self-protection. They're all willing to sacrifice their safety in their motivational system. Okay, same thing here, more or less a replication, except for this one here that drops out, which is Machiavellianism. Although this was rather weak here. Okay. They don't really care about their family too much. These are more strong correlations. Point 4, I'm sure you know, is about double the average effect size we get in social and personality psychology. So and this is just self-report, scale of 1 to 5 data. This isn't probably other ways that we could really capture this using behavioral methods where we ask people to make choices between like your mom and your lover or something like that, or your mom and your job or something, right? Your mom or your dog, wherever the hell my dog is. So they don't seem to care too much about family. They seem a bias against. And indeed, people who have lived with clinical psychopaths or clinical narcissists would report something like these people impose externalities on the people closest to them, their family, their lovers, right? This would be what you'd expect. They have a motivational system that says, I'm going to get mine, and whoever's nearest to me when I drop my atomic bomb will get the worst of the results. Okay, so now we get to where I'm really changing my mind here. And admittedly, when I wrote this paper, I didn't change my mind. I didn't really think too much about these results. I was kind of in the phase of my career where I was just trying to pump out as many publications as possible, right? Just get the numbers, get the numbers, get the numbers. Now I don't really care as much about publications, although I guess I still sort of do. And you see status and mate seeking, right? So this is, are people seeking status? Are people seeking new relationships, new partners? And so if you look, they're both correlated all the way across. Okay, and I started wondering here about, well, maybe it's not maybe it's not mate seeking, maybe it's status seeking. And maybe if you get status, you get mates, it's like a knock-on effect. They're just correlated with one another. We find similar drama over here, and you see status, again, correlated, not so much here, I guess, but mate seeking correlated here and here. So I'm starting to think, okay, maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe it's not about sex. Maybe it's about this achievement motivation, this I want to be number 1 in the group. I want to have power over the group, okay? So I want to talk, moving on now to what's going on in the workplace, though, to give you some organizational psychology context. Okay, so what do these darker people do? These are the colleagues in Austria that I was mentioning that are responsible for most of this. So if this is bad, don't blame me, blame them. And we did an experimental personality study. Okay, it relies on what's called the Diamonds framework. The Diamonds framework is an attempt by social psychologists to explain the variability possible in the world, right? So are there opportunities for deception, opportunities for mating, opportunities for adversity? So all these letters stand for a different dimension of how you might understand the world. And we said it's present or absent. So we randomly assign people to the condition of, say, adversity is present or adversity is absent. We assessed the short dark tetrad, and we had favorability ratings in terms of this workplace. Is this a workplace you like, right? Do you like your workplace? All right, so in terms of duty, we presented, in terms of duty, we present here, right? Please imagine that your workplace is task-oriented thinking. It requires getting a job done and your duty is fulfilled. This is present. The absence is just the absence of it, right? We just say not about, right? Please imagine your workplace task-oriented thinking is not required and is not about getting your jobs done. So this is a really simple person perception style study. Now we manipulate all of these things, right? Duty, intellect, adversity, mating, positivity, negativity, deception, and sociality. The idea being that the presence or absence of these features should, one, make jobs more or less appealing, but two, it should be moderated further by the dark triad. That the kinds of work environments these people want to be in might be a function of the features of the workplace. So we already know that people high in the dark triad have particular job interests, for example, right? So people high in Machiavellianism don't want to do jobs like nursing. Narcissistic people want to do jobs that get them out there in front of the world, yeah, like Kanye West or something. Okay? So, for example, we ask, how do you feel that you would fit in this workplace? And we use this measure to do so, right? That you pick the amount of overlap that you feel with this workplace, right? Self and workplace. How would you feel about this job as a whole? 1 to 5. How much effort would you put into working for this company? 1 to 7. And how would you feel about this job as a whole? Again, sorry. Oh, I got the one twice. Sorry. Oh, quitting and the quitting one. In the end, my organizational ecologist friends thought these would be separate, but in the end, we just collapsed them into a single one, along with kind of the generalized workplace favorability for all of these across all of the different experimental conditions. Okay, so we use a short dark tetrad, no surprise. For those of you who wanted more detail on this, I'll give it to you now. Okay, so Machiavellianism, it says things, it asks people, how much do you agree with this statement? It's not wise to let other people to know your secrets. For narcissism, people see me as a natural leader. For psychopathy, people often say I'm out of control. And lastly, for sadism, watching a fist fight excites me. Now, indeed, it's a stretch in little ways, because if you're familiar with this scale, the short dark tetrad, the authors technically don't call the traits psychopathy, narcissism, etc. anymore. They've given them other names. So, for example, this is like meanness. So it's not called psychopathy in the scale. It's actually called meanness. So they're not really, maybe it wasn't the best measure to use, but it seems to be the gold standard. So no surprise, though, that when things are present, right? For example, when good things are present, people are happier in the workplace, right? People are happier when there's things to be done in the workplace. People are happier when there's intellectual opportunities. People, of course, no surprise, less happy when there's adversity in the workplace. Strangely as well, they're a little bit less happy in the mating game, okay? They're more happy if it's a positive place, and they're less happy when it's negative. This is like, duh, right? They're happier when there's less deception, an honest workplace, for example. And, of course, the sociality makes people happier as well. Okay, so, So we see these kind of clustered patterns of when things are present versus when things are absent, predicting whether people have different workplace positive experiences. Now, what else? Okay, so not much going on in terms of men and women. Slight effect here, okay? So the absence doesn't seem to drive differences, but the presence seems to make women slightly happier than men, right? So both people are unhappy when the workplace is crap, both men and women. But when the positive things are present, women are a little bit happier than men are in the workplace. So you make a better workplace, it might make women slightly happier than it's making the men that are also working there, okay? Over here, you have this mating effect. So this was adversity, this was mating. These are two of the dimensions of the diamonds. And you have this kind of crossover interaction going on, right? So when mating opportunities are absent, men are less happy with the workplace than women are. And the flip side is also true, right? That men are maybe using the workplace as a place to find a romantic partner. And women maybe don't want a sexualized workplace, but men a little bit seem to want a sexualized workplace. Lastly, positivity. I think it's lastly. Positivity, you find nothing over here with absence, right? Men and women agree here. But in terms of presence, men are slightly happier than women when it's present, okay? Okay, but what about the dark tetrad? Because that's why you're here, I guess, right? What's going on? Well, most of the action seems to be over here, and it seems to be rather uniform. So it says a couple things here. So it probably says that sadism is irrelevant here, because these are all basically matching, right? So it's a little bit of will be my case later for why you don't really maybe need sadism here. But we included it because we know that some reviewer is going to be, hey, well, what about sadism? And so as Machiavellian authors, as you need to be, if I'm honest with you, you include it to shut the reviewers up before they have anything to say. So we can say we included it, but it didn't really make any difference. It didn't have any unique predictions. But what do we see otherwise? Mating, this is consistent with other research of mine from like 2020 with a colleague of mine, Ryan Sherman, where we showed that if you showed people images of very benign places like the workplace, a bar, a classroom, and you asked them to evaluate those places, people high on the dark triad read into those places more mating opportunities and more adversity opportunities. Now here, in the condition when mating is present, right? So it's there. We've told them it's there, right? There's greater favorability ratings of the workplace among the people high on the dark triad. So maybe it's not all men, back to the sex difference from before, right? Maybe it's not all men who want a sexualized workplace. Maybe it's men who are high on the dark triad, for example. Okay. So in the case of absence, however, we still see sadism is basically irrelevant, right? That the findings are redundant, more or less, all the way down the line with psychopathy. And so that's one of the debates in the field is about whether you should add this because these two are so highly correlated. And if you are old enough, you might remember the old argument was that this one and this one are so highly correlated that we shouldn't include them both. Nevertheless, we find adversity and negativity effects for Machiavellianism. That when the workplace has less adversity and has more negativity, less negativity, people high on Machiavellianism are happier with their workplace. So they don't necessarily want a positive, well, I guess they do want a positive place. They don't want a negative place, and they don't want a place that has adversity, which are probably similar things. Same thing with positivity for Machiavellianism, but now we bring in narcissism, right? So absent positive places, narcissists report less happiness in the workplace, okay? So they don't want, the narcissist not necessarily cares about the negativity, but cares about the positivity, which is maybe what their mindset is. It's much more about the upside than the downside. So let me give you a little bit something else. So while this organizational psychology paper stuff is not published because my colleagues want to keep collecting data, they have this bug in them that says it's not enough, it's not enough, it's not enough. So we already have hundreds and hundreds of people, but they want to collect more. It's like, okay, fine, do whatever you want. But I want to give you something that's not published. I don't think it ever will be published. Why go to a talk if all you're going to hear is what's in academic papers? You can just go read the papers, right? So several years ago, I came across one of these stupid images that you get on like Facebook, right? So as you probably get this too, some summary of the world and how people are this way or that way. And we started wondering about, well, how people spend their time, and could we understand the Dark Triad in any way by pairing this stuff here with the details we have already on the Dark Triad from a study of mine back in 2020 where we collected data from, I don't know, 10,000 something people or 11,000 people from 49 countries or something. So we could take the country level rates of each of the traits and try to correlate it with what people in China are doing with their time, what people in Canada, America, you know, wherever, all these places, Italy. I think I was presenting this for the first time when I was still working for Italy. This is my minion, my friend, John, Portugal. He's a stats guy in business. And what we do together a lot is we take national level data that exists already and we pair it together and we show cool stuff. So for example, we have a study under review about Ozempic use in America and all this in 38 states of America. What are the kinds of countries, what are the kinds of areas of America that use Ozempic the most? And how does that relate to narcissism, for example? Yeah, other one we did was something like the amount of laws a country has is correlated with corruption levels. So the more laws of a country, think Italy, okay? The more laws of a country, the higher corruption the index is from like the UN and all these kinds of markers. So we're not political scientists, so we're struggling to find a place to publish this paper. But it was like this study here where I saw an image and I sent him an image, and an hour or two later he's like, I did the study. Like another study. So that's under review at some world something journal, I don't even know. So what he did is he paired this data together, looking at time spent on these activities and the data we have from this huge data set. Oh, I thought this wasn't from mine. This was from one of these like psych surveys that you can go online and get data from for free. Okay. And I won't belabor you with this complicated stat stuff. I let him do that. It has to do with hierarchical linear modeling is not as good at partialing variance as the spatial autoregressive models, because this can account for things like the distances between countries. So in principle, your country should be more similar to Poland than you are to America just by proximity. And that if you don't control for that, then you've inflated your correlations. And that's what he does. He's obsessed with this. So as I said, we agree this isn't going to be published. There isn't really much interesting things to talk about, but let's just have some fun with it, right? So we have Machiavellianism scores seem to be positively correlated with going to events, but narcissism is negatively correlated with going to events. I have no idea what that means. Narcissism is positively correlated with spending time with friends. Okay, right? This is a way of building your social network, perhaps. But the psychopath is also like spending time with friends. Okay, I'm not sure what that means. Not the person, the nation, okay? Machiavellians, to be expected, okay? They're not really friend-oriented. Over here, let's say paid work. They don't really want to do much work, obviously. How can I find ways to not do work? The Machiavellian is nothing. There's just nothing going on there. But for the narcissist, no, I want to have fun. I want to travel. I want to, have passive income or something. I don't know. I want to do OnlyFans so I don't have to actually get a real job. Machiavellianism here, interestingly enough, housework. So I won't make, I don't want you to make anything big out of this. It's just there's a potential for you, especially as young researchers, that you don't necessarily have to go and collect your own data. The world has so much data out there now. We have this numerification of the world that if you just look a little bit, you might find data. And how does he find this data? Well, he uses Claude. Right? This AI thing. I'm afraid of it. He uses it. It's like witchcraft to me. But basically, it's like, and Claude will do the work, I'm afraid to say. And as an editor, I really don't know how to process this information, knowing that where papers are coming from. And yeah, so I can't do anything about that. Anyways, time, good. So what we've attempted to do so far is focus on theory testing. I have a hypothesis that the Dark Triad are correlated with status seeking, but it also has applied concerns in that our focus on organizational psychology in particular. So you can study the Dark Triad, the Dark Tetrad in the workplace, and that might be useful. But if you're a nerd like me, you might say, well, okay, well, yeah, great. So what? What's all this mean? Like, you're just reporting correlations, professor. give me some context, put it into some framework. That framework of my favorite one, of course, is life history theory. Life history theory is a theory that we stole from biology, which is meant to account for differences between species, like these here, for example. And what we say is these species are considered fast, more or less, and these species are considered relatively slow. So we're over here, obviously. But what happens with fast species is they have many babies, they're under lots of risk, they mature very quickly, they die often, okay? But the chimpanzees and the humans and the elephants, they're on the other side of this spectrum. We call them K-selected, for example, okay? So this is from biology. This is one of my favorite theories. And the premise is that we can understand individual level variance just like we can understand species level variance by using this theory. Here's a little hint at this. What you have here on the left is rates of the Dark Triad. This is rates of narcissism and rates of Machiavellianism as a function of distance from the capital city of 50-something countries. That's what you have here, okay? So you see the closer you get to the equator, the more narcissistic you are. The further you get from the equator, the more Machiavellian you are. Now, what can we make of this? Well, for example, there's more risk, more danger, more disease around the equator, and maybe narcissism, like peacocks showing off their amazing plumage, right, in Carnival and all of that. Maybe that's what this is. Now, I admit, we dropped the ball on this one. We didn't do anything more with this. This is like a BBS commentary. And with Machiavellianism, I never watched this movie, but I know the quote, so forgive me. Winter is coming. Got to plan ahead. That's what Machiavellianism is partly about, planning ahead. So maybe, again, this is conjecture, but what we were trying to show in this little commentary that we wrote was that the Dark Triad scores might be sensitive to not only national level variance, but what is it in those countries that might drive those things? It's not only an individual phenomenon. This is a statewide, a country, and you might get what's called an evoked culture, right? That the culture of Sweden might generate, right? And I mean culture like the ecology, the weather, all this kind of stuff, might generate the logical response of being Machiavellian, for example. Now, I don't remember where your country, let me see if I can find it here. Anyone see it? I don't see it anywhere. Oh, here we go. So Czech Republic is here, and then Czech Republic is here. Does that jive with your sense of, no? I don't know. Okay. Anyways, oh, why is this, what is this doing? Poland. And we're in a weird place as well. Sorry. So to this point, we've tried to look at maybe the Dark Triad could be different between countries in a predictable way. Like, for example, we can all agree, I hope, that Turkey is a much more dangerous, competitive, risky, harsh place than Australia, which is when we collected data, was the #1 safest place in the world for women. And what you find is that there is a difference here, right? That Turkish men are more narcissistic than Australian men. You find a difference here, okay, that Turkish women are also more, but the real action is here, right? That Australian women are much less narcissistic than Turkish women. Now, I didn't like this finding, and I still don't like it because I lived in Australia and I hated it there, but it seems to suggest something that's consistent with the gender paradox idea, that in nicer conditions, larger sex differences are created because people are freed up, right? In Turkey, the women have to kind of up their game. And this way, narcissism is a adaptive response to the harsh ecology to say, you got to get a job, you got to be cutthroat, you got to be selfish. Because here, you're just going to go to the beach and you're going to drink beer and you're going to wear flip-flops and these things that Australians do that I didn't particularly like. So to not belabor it too much further, the field, my research, all of it, so many limitations. The heavy reliance on not just mTurk samples, but we're still using other services like Prolific to collect this data, right? So I'm applying for a grant soon in Poland, and guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask for a whole bunch of money to collect data online because it's cheap, it's easy, and all that type of stuff. So this is potentially problematic, but other samples do have community volunteers, others have student samples, and so we can cross, in all the different angles, for example, that, okay, we're getting there in some ways. Most of the research is cross-sectional, not experimental. There have been there have been some highlights that were experimental, for example, some standout papers. But as a rule, people submitting papers on the Dark Triad or personality in general just take 2 questionnaires, smash them together, and they try to publish them in a journal. If I can give you advice as emerging researchers, just don't do that. This is not the best way to get published in good journals, because the editors are like, yeah, questionnaires, great, whatever. Show me something cool, right? So try not to do that. Try to do experiments. Try to do something real. There is more and more, but there's limited there might be research in Japan and research in Turkey and research in Mali or something, but rarely do you have cross-culture work. Now, we've done some of these, but it's, again, standout cases. Maybe only 5 studies that were genuinely cross-cultural, and they rarely actually were good at accounting for why the countries are different, unlike the paper that I just presented for you that we published in 2019. This is a tricky one, but I don't know how the division of your country, but like in America, right, we have 50 states. And so if you have regions, what about the intra-regional differences? What are the effects in Georgia or in New York or in California? And what accounts for those things? Getting this data is going to be quite hard, but I think it's probably part of the future, right? Not just national comparisons, but within nation comparisons. So now you have reduced the problem of cultural differences and linguistic differences. You have just Americans who speak something like American English. Admittedly, Texas and New York might speak slightly different, but I think this would be a cool place to go next. Most of the research focuses on these general measures of these traits, but they have smaller pieces to them. They have aspects to them, and we very rarely study them, mostly because we don't have any reason to do so, and so we use briefer measures. And if we reduce the scales we have, we inflate our type 1 error. So as a rule, this hasn't been done, but it probably should be done if we could. Lots of natural groups designs, like when I compared Turkish people to Australian people, it's hard to experimentally manipulate people into becoming more narcissistic. I'm not really sure how we can do that. Maybe, or should we do it? Limited person by situation test. This is similar to what I was saying about experiments up here. And then lastly, how many dark traits are enough, right? I mean, how many books of this do we need, for example, right? So I'm of the mind of the less, the better. So I'm on it should just be the Dark Triad, but I've had, heated exchanges with other academics about, no, you must include sadism. It accounts for more variance. And I'll tell you what I'd say to him, so you can parrot it back to him. Sadism only seems to account for unique variance when you're measuring sadistic behavior. So it's not impressive, right? It doesn't account for something above psychopathy when psychopathy is in the model. But if you measure sadistic behavior, like they did this bug crushing task, fake bugs for those of you who like bugs, but they made a bug crushing task, and then sadism predicted bug crushing above the other traits. Okay, so the attitude, sadism, predicts the behavior. This is what we've been knowing, from the theory of planned behavior, for example. This is nothing new. Okay, so that's it. Pedro says, are there any questions? Thank you.
If I may. Please prepare your questions. Do you have some questions before you do? And you can also ask people on Zoom whether they have some questions. So before you will come up with something intelligent or original, I'm interested in politics, and I cannot help not to ask you about the current era, which calls for politicians who very well qualify as prime examples of the Dark Triad, and also the voters who are voting these people in. So what is it in the current era that those Dark Triad politicians are in the foreground? And why are people voting for them? And is it a pendulum where we can expect a swing to the other side?
So a question about politics, that one of the topics you're not supposed to talk about in polite company anymore. But we seem to live in a world which may or may not be more volatile, but we're fed information that tells us that it is. And if you feel under threat based on a life history framework, you should you should up your selfishness. It makes logical sense, right? If the future is uncertain, then you should be selfish. And maybe part of voting for strongmen politicians is part of an expression of existential dread. And just what makes them strongmen is they're, for example, high on psychopathy and high on Machiavellianism. And so it might require that the daily diet of information that we get from things like social media is not so dire relative to the actual situation in the world. I mean, you may remember this book by Steven Pinker. Now, admittedly, this was before Ukrainian nonsense and the stuff in Gaza now. But his case was that the world is the safest, the healthiest it's ever been, and people lost their mind at him. They're like, that's not the way it is. Things are so bad. Like, but on the data, like we live longer than we've ever lived. Fewer people die in everything, like in war, and even maybe with the blip of these two events that we have going on, still we might be living in the safest era. And so, but we believe, because of our cognitive biases around avoiding risk, we overestimate the danger we find ourselves in. And this is on both sides of the equation, right? This is the U-shape, the U function of left and right. The people on the left, the high left, they're correlated with the Dark Triad positively. People high on, like, who are extremely progressive, they have high scores on the Dark Triad. People who are extremely right, they have high scores on the Dark Triad. They've come together in the bottom. The communists and the fascists are weird friends, like they were in World War II. Yeah, but I think it makes them feel safe, right? So my friend Hector Garcia wrote a whole book about, he called it Alpha Gods, and he was trying to make the case. This was about religion, of course, but he talked about politicians as well. Is that we under these times of life is dangerous, we want this this protector figure, right? And so belief systems around God might also be related to this. I think when you're in existential dread, you're incapable of thinking long term. It shortens your expectancy. I mean, just to give you a slightly personal example, right? So when I was 13, no, when I was 12, I was a great student, straight A student. Right? Then I was 13 and my father died. I never got straight A's again. I didn't say to myself, "Hey, why would I work so hard and try to get good grades?" My brain just switched, and it was like, "Yeah, screw this. Like, I'm gonna have fun. Like, I want to watch Star Trek, and I want to like." And I didn't get. Yeah, I think it, without even being aware of it, the dread reorients your timeline to something shorter, and so you're not worried about those 50-year things like climate change or something. You're worried about the now things, because where am I getting my food, for example? How are the gas prices going to affect my Porsche or something? Well, once people go paranoid, let's call it, it's really hard to go back. I mean, think about PTSD as an example. So in some ways, this is an adaptive response to the context that these people are in, these soldiers are in. It's like, yes, this is what you should change this way to survive. And it's not until there's a mismatch between that system that was protecting them that they're having trouble getting rid of. So I think once we go in that state of the world sucks, it's really hard to get out of it. There might even be need to some VR therapy or some new therapy techniques that might be needed. But once we go dark, we don't really, it's very hard to go back. Yeah, but unless we infect our kids with it, and we do, right? We infect our children with our fears, and then it's quote unquote intergenerational trauma, right? So it might take 2 or 3 generations. It's worth studying, certainly, how long it takes. You know, if you're a refugee, how many generations does it take? Well, you do longitudinal research. I don't. So you could just collect data from 20 years and just see how many generations does it take before people like just, okay, calm down. Wants to ask anything? Anyone brave enough? Bark, 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 bark. No, sorry.
Thank you. I would like to give an alert that I'm a therapist, so maybe I try to Exactly. Because I try to see the situation more as a movie, not as a snapshot, maybe, which I saw here. So I was wondering how you see these traits. Like when I hear the word trait, it feels like something inborn, something stable, something not changeable. I try to believe that, you know, we can modulate, we can play with it. So I was just wondering, what is your perception on a change on the Dark Triad? Thank you.
Okay, so change. I'm not sure if you can change people's personality. I think it's probably more likely is you can decouple their personality from bad behavior, and so re-engineer the way they deal with the world. So I might still be narcissistic, but I'm imposing less externalities on the world, and I'm also not affecting myself as much. So I'm not totally sure if we're able to reduce traits. One bit though is the idea that traits are stable. And so one of the idea of this is that, yeah, over the course of people's lives there's relative stability, but there is change. It's what are the events in people's lives, and most of the time researchers study rather benign events. So in the experimental setting, it's, you know, what you have to give a speech, a public speech or something, and how does that change it has to be something real, something existential, something that requires a reorientation to the world in both ways. So having children is one of those things. So we know that men change like just by holding their babies. And it's like, this is a big deal. This is something that evolution has said, you better fly right. It changes them physiologically, like it's that level of depth. And so it's probable that the idea of the fixedness of traits is that researchers didn't have a good types of context to manipulate. In longitudinal stuff, you might be able to get, you know, deaths in the family and murder and all these kinds of things as hysteresis points, but so few people experience these things, we can't really detect them either. So I'm not convinced we can change traits. The last thing I'll say to that is this. There is some evidence that you can make people high. You can, I call it this way, you can neuter the psychopath, so to speak, right? So you take a prisoner, let's assume a prisoner is a psychopath. Give the prisoner a puppy to take care of. Now, is he no longer a psychopath? Is he no longer a criminal? No, but now he finally has something that needs him, that he has to take care of. And it shifts his brain to this. He might kill other people, but I will, don't you touch my dog, right? And so John Wick, thank you, John Wick, right? John Wick is a great example. So I don't think this changes their nature. I think it simply changes the pathway that says when something is bad, fight, push on the world. This is a bit where men have, let's call it, to use the word of the decade, trauma, some sort of trauma. They push on the world. The Dark Triad are pushing on the world. That's what those traits do. In contrast, when women experience those same traumas, they usually recede into themselves. They go into depression, right? This is internalizing. So the same bad stuff generates different responses in men and women, probably because there's an asymmetry for the risks for pushing on the world or retreating into oneself, and also the benefits that you get. Men don't get the benefits from retreating. Our depression doesn't generate the same. It often generates disgust in people. If I'm crying, people can be, you might say, I want you to cry, show me your feelings, but then I do, that's scary. I don't know how to deal with this. So I don't think I answered your question exactly, but that's the best I can do for you. That's the best we can do. Anybody else, or is it late on a Thursday and you want to drink? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Say goodbye to Pedro. Bye, everybody.